Premier, thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure, Chris.
Now, I want to start this interview by saying congratulations. As a matter of fact, maybe even a round of applause.
Oh, no.
Because you are on your own fighting the good fight about opening borders. It's over time, isn't it?
Well, I think so. It doesn't stand to reason with case numbers pretty low across the nation. Really, this is a time when Australia has the opportunity to shine, Chris. And yes, I'm the Premier of the largest state, and yes, we want to make sure that we provide opportunities for our citizens here in New South Wales. But if you're talking about Australia as a nation and our capacity not just to boost tourism dollars amongst our 25 million people, but also to start having conversations about manufacturing across sectors and supply chains we can all be part of. And
yes,
that's not really possible so long as states have their borders up. Now, look, we've engaged in a bit of argy-bargy, and I'm confident those borders will eventually come down. But I think in the next few months in particular, we shouldn't underestimate the economic shock our nation has been through and the potential cliff in a few months' time if we don't get our act together in generating that job activity. So that's what is top of mind for me. It's what causes me to lose sleep at night. We're always worried about the deadly, contagious nature of the virus, and that won't change. But then to have to worry about the hundreds of thousands of jobs as well, which have already gone, I'm about preventing any further job losses, in fact, starting to get the economy back on its feet, because the consequences were going to be felt for a long time. And the quicker our internal national borders come down, the quicker we can actually address some of these challenges, I feel.
Well, your co-members of the National Cabinet, Anastasia Palaszczuk, said today she won't be lectured by you. And we had the Premier in WA saying he feels bullied by you. You're a bully, Gladys Berejiklian.
Well, I just feel we're all adults, and I was asked a simple question about what I felt about the border, and I just said that I wish they'd come down. Especially as restrictions have been lifted in all states now about being able to travel wherever you want within a state. Why shouldn't that be being able to travel to another state, especially for our border communities? I mean, Dan Andrews and I have a shared border, and that border remains open. Unfortunately, people in northern New South Wales don't have that opportunity, and I feel for families and communities who don't have that artificial border in their head. They live as a community, and yet they're suffering not being able to visit relatives and not being able to access services across the borders. So for the border communities, it's a very big obstacle, but I just don't understand the logic of it. I don't understand what's so different from from southeast Queensland to northern New South Wales. And in fact, I heard one of the Premier's quip about us having the most cases. Well, Sydney's the gateway to Australia.
Yes.
We've welcomed more than 15,000 Aussies coming back home. They actually don't even all live in New South Wales. They live in different parts of the country. So we've processed them, we've quarantined them through Sydney because as good national citizens, and then they've gone off to their home states. And similarly, we have the highest population, the most densely populated population, and also the most overseas travellers. But now that the national borders are shut, which is a good thing, and I want that to continue, there's no reason why the internal borders should have those restrictions.
See, I keep hearing Steve Marshall in Adelaide in South Australia say, I'm still taking health advice. Well, he's had more zeros than a wooden spoon team in an NRL competition. You could listen to health bureaucrats indefinitely about closing borders because they don't want to take any risk whatsoever. But we don't live in a world where we don't take risks.
Well, if you look at the health advice, I don't remember reading any health advice about the borders. That was something the Premier's decided to do, and I have absolute respect for the health experts. And in New South Wales, we've had a very cautious approach to how we deal with the virus. We had over 200 cases a day in March, Chris, and that wasn't sustainable. We would have ended up like New York or London if we weren't careful, given the size of our population and the rate of the spread. So I'm proud of the fact we've reduced those case numbers to what we have. But now our attention does have to focus on dealing with the economic consequences, and I'd like us to continue working together. The National Cabinet's worked well. We're not always going to agree on everything, but I also feel the tone's important. If we should be able to express a view as leaders of our state, and that's all I was doing when I was asked the question. I think it's in our nation's economic interests, and if you're talking about jobs and the economy and the well-being of our citizens, I think those internal borders do have to come down.
I couldn't agree more, and the figures we saw today from Tourism Queensland about the fact that it's costing Queensland tourism businesses, $50 million a single day is just outrageous. And whatever it costs the rest of the states, you don't even want to add up those numbers. I want to play for you something that may be a bit of a gauge about how the public is feeling about your stance. I went out today and had a chat to a few people about what you were saying to Queensland and other states about reopening.
I think it's up to each state to decide when and where, because they're the ones at the end of the day that take responsibility, and they're the ones that are going to get criticised.
If we take things too drastically, too quickly, then we're going to go straight back to square one.
What about some of those states and territories that haven't recorded an active case for like 3-4 weeks?
I understand if they haven't had an active case for 3 or 4 weeks, like in Australia and the Northern Territory, then it's understandable that you can open the borders.
I think they should open, but it's for them to decide. All 4 borders opening up. I mean, it's got to be freedom of movement. They can't control that. And it's probably a federal issue anyway. There's supposed to be free of access throughout the Territory of Australia or the Commonwealth.
The Queensland government should start looking at what the other states are doing and opening the borders and let people move around, and if it's going to boost the economy, good. Some standards which should be made national rather than just let's do it ourselves and make sure everything's all right.
Premier, I think in the main they were virtually on your side, but people are being cautious, and that's also understandable. We want to contribute to a safe environment. We want to contribute to social distancing as long as we can.
Absolutely, and I'll be the first one to say New South Wales has taken a cautious approach, Chris, and I respect every Premier to have the ability to determine what they do, but I also think we should be free to have a conversation about what's going to differentiate Australia from different parts of the world and how we can actually use this opportunity,
yes,
not only to encourage our own citizens to get to know our nation better. I mean, I'm embarrassed to say there are parts of our nation I've not been to or visited,
yep,
and you know, ticked off. But I also feel we need a conversation about how we can get our economies going, how we can support one another, and how we can, given, and I have to say, and thank you to the public, that we have been so successful in controlling the virus compared to other parts of the world. Let's use that as a plus to say Australia is COVID safe. How can we use that to turn around our economic situation, and how can we use it to be a positive differentiator for Australia into the future? It does give us more options than what other countries have. And I think it's an opportunity for us to have those economic discussions. And I'm all for one to think about how Australia can get into advanced manufacturing, how Australia can be more self-reliant in a whole lot of supply chains. And these are conversations I think we should have, and they're conversations that certainly go beyond the border of New South Wales. But given the unique way and the unique circumstances in which we've come together as a nation, I think all of us should feel free to express our views in this regard and have a good debate without turning it personal. This is just premiers having a view and expressing what we think is in our nation's best interest.
You are absolutely right about encouraging people to open the borders and use domestic tourism, which has the potential to be a real boom for the country in a very short space of time. Were you a little bit slow in getting kids back to school full-time? They go back to school full-time on Monday. Were you a bit slow?
No, I don't feel it at all, Chris, and I'll explain why. We have more than 2,200 public schools in Australia, in New South Wales. Some have a population as small as 10. Some have a population as large as 2,000 students. And we wanted to make sure that we had all the medical supplies, all the guidelines in place, so that once schools reopen, they stay open for the duration of the pandemic. Now, what I've explained to our people in New South Wales is that having a school shut down temporarily because there's been a case identified is going to be the new normal, and we had that happen in New South Wales yesterday and today with a college or with a high school in the Lower North Shore. Now that's going to become normal, and that's okay, but so long as we know that the vast majority of our students are going to have face-to-face learning for 100% of the time during the course of the pandemic, that is what we want, a sustainable way to keep schools open. Because overseas, we've seen some jurisdictions, some countries or some provinces that open schools and shut them all down again, then open them back up again. I don't want us to go through that. I want us to have a situation now that we've done our homework, we've got everything in place, schools will be reopening, and let's keep them open for the duration of the pandemic. But if there is a situation where there's a breakout in a suburb or a town, that we can take those actions to shut down the school, do the deep clean, get in touch with all the contacts, and make sure communities feel safe. And even though it's not in the health advice, we've made sure that every school has access to thermometers to do temperature checks if that's what they want to do, to make sure they've got extra equipment in the sick bays should teachers be worried about a situation, and make sure that everybody is safe, and make sure that principals also consider things like drop-offs and pickups.
Yep.
You don't literally want hundreds of parents in and around the school at the same time. And so these are things we had to go through in detail. So I don't regret for a second. I mean, of course I regret that all our students had to have that disrupted learning, and the pressure on parents I can't even imagine. Imagine trying to work from home and then try and oversee or supervise your children. That would have been unbearable, and I really empathise with families who've been through that. But at least now people in New South Wales can have confidence that from Monday, certainly our intent is to keep schools open during the duration of the pandemic. We don't know when the cure's coming. We don't know when the vaccine is here. So it's about having a sustainable way of living with the virus.
Yeah, I won't criticise teachers again because I failed dismally as a homeschooler, let me tell you. Now, just on tertiary education, what is your plan about fast-tracking overseas foreign students into campuses in Australia?
Well, look, this is an interesting issue, Chris. As I said, New South Wales has processed about 15,000 Aussies who've decided to come back home at different times, and some have decided a bit later than others. We've processed through our hotels and quarantined about 15,000 Aussies, and the taxpayer is paying for that. The other states are chipping in. So, for example, if we've welcomed, back home Victorians or South Australians, their governments have helped chip in to foot the bill. But taxpayers have been paying for that. And I think there comes a point in time where we say, hang on, Aussies, you've had all these months to come back. Should the taxpayers still be footing the bill? That's question number one. And the second issue is, if we've found a safe way to quarantine people who've come back from overseas, shouldn't we consider foreign students, given a lot of universities are going to have to shed thousands of staff, or I worry about some of our regional unis that might go under completely if we don't welcome some of these foreign students back.
So quarantine them for 14 days like the rest, or just test them when they arrive?
No. The full quarantine.
Okay.
But then the students would pick up the tab, or the university would, right? The taxpayer wouldn't. Because that means that we can still keep the economy going but do it safely. And at the moment we know that we always come third or fourth. Students tend to want to study in the United States or the UK, and then they might think about Australia. Given where we are, perhaps there's an opportunity for us to pick up, in addition to having the best and brightest here in Australia, but also pick up some of the best and brightest around the world who choose to come and study here. So long as they've gone through the 14 days quarantine, and if it means jobs in the bush, in the regions, if it means keeping those university jobs going and the universities going, well, that's not a bad thing. So I think we should start having that conversation about how we do it safely. OK, one last one before we let you go. We've still got just over 6 million Australians who have downloaded the COVIDSafe app. We need more. People are reluctant, but you can give us an example of how the app actually works, because we've got one case in which investigators trying to retrace a person's steps and associates have been given a great deal of help. Yeah, there are lots of examples where that's happened. Essentially, the app speeds up the manual process. So all the states can do the manual thing, but being able to do it electronically means someone who has the virus doesn't walk around with the virus and spread it around. So, and the contacts can be told ASAP, as soon as possible they might have it. So the app is so useful in that regard, and I do recommend people downloading it. I know it's copped a bit of flack, but we think it's a positive. And even me, I'm not very up there with IT, but I made sure I downloaded it because it will keep all of us safe.
Thank you very much for your time, but most importantly, thank you very much for pushing the case of reopening Australia again. You are definitely on the right track, and good luck with it.
Thank you, Chris.